So that's really cool. And then they came up, yes,
I was going to say, theoretically, by their rules, Islam or Muslim children could be able to say one nation under Allah. And then all of a sudden, I bet they'd want to be taken, they would find that religious,
Well, actually, I mean, that is fine. If individual citizens or groups or anything choose to pray to one nation under Allah, that's absolutely fine. I would stand up for that.
I would as well, but I'm saying sometimes...
But the government wouldn't think. Can you imagine the government of the United States saying, let's change it to one nation under Allah?
They would say, you can't say one nation under Allah because it's religious.
Exactly. Right?
But then you shouldn't be able to say God, right? But I think that somehow I think they would change their view if everyone played to the name they call their country.
Exactly. It's one of the arguments I continually put in my briefs. I say, make it one nation under Jesus. Would that one be okay? Because all that history. Or better yet, let's make it one nation under Protestantism. Because if you look at the founding of this nation, remember we came from England, right? Where the English hated the Catholics. The French and the Spanish were Catholic. England was a Protestant country. You had to take an oath, the Supremacy Act of England, which was still applicable here in the United States. You had to say that you would support the King of England over the Pope. Right? It was clearly one of the basic foundational principles of this nation. So if you want to say one nation under God, by all of those same reasons, you should be able to say one nation under the Protestant faith. How come we don't have that one? So in any event, I thank Congress for their prayers. That was really good. And then the other thing, this is really interesting. Kind of bear with me because it's a little complex, but it's not all that complex. Remember, there's two religion clauses in the First Amendment. First of all, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's called the Establishment Clause. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's called the Free Exercise Clause. And that would be if individuals chose to say one nation under Allah. That would be a free exercise right. As individual citizens, we all have the right to say anything we want and worship any way we want. And if we choose to put one nation under God in the middle of our Pledge of Allegiance when we do it, so be it. Go ahead. You can do that. You just can't get the machinery of the state to do that for you. That's the Establishment Clause part. Right? So we had this distinction between the two clauses of the First Amendment, the two religion clauses. And it used to be that the Supreme Court upheld this idea for free exercise very strongly. They used what was called strict scrutiny. That means that unless government has a compelling interest to interfere with your rights, even if you're doing something bad, otherwise we would call bad, we are not going to let the government interfere with your free exercise rights. We think that free exercise is so important in this country that unless there's a really compelling interest, that the law is narrowly tailored to serve that interest, you can do anything you want. And that was the situation in a case called Sherbert v. Verner, in which case a woman who was a Seventh-day Adventist couldn't work on Saturday. Her employer said, look, you don't work on Saturday, you're going to get fired. She said, I can't work on Saturday, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. They said, okay, you're fired. So she went to get unemployment benefits. And the unemployment office said, well, sorry, you quit. So I didn't quit, I couldn't exercise my religion. I said, I can't work on Saturday. I said, too bad, you quit. And the case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, you are interfering with her free exercise rights. You, the government of the United States, you give benefits to everyone else. You're penalizing her because she was doing what her religion mandates. You have to give her free exercise, her unemployment benefits. Right? That was the, quote, strict scrutiny rule. And everybody was happy with that. Congress loved it because that protects the Christians, of course. So we like that idea. Well, in 1990, a case called Smith, Employment Division v. Smith came in. It was almost the same case, slightly different, because it wasn't a guy who was, somebody who wasn't doing their exercise, which involved something just not working. It involved some Native Americans who were ingesting peyote, right? And that was part of their religious ritual. And they said, okay, we do this. We have to do this for our religion. And the case went to the Supreme Court because the unemployment office in Oregon wouldn't give them their benefits. They said, you violated the law. You want us to pay you now for doing that? They said, we're violating the law. We're exercising our religious rights. So it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court changed what they had. Instead of having this strict scrutiny that they applied to the Sherbert v. Verner case, they said, no, we're not going to do this. It was written by Justice Scalia, who said, by the way, government may not lend its power to one or the other side in controversies over religious dogma. So what are we doing here when we say, in God we trust? God save the United States and Honorable Court. We're a nation under God. It sounds like we're lending its power to the side that says there's a God. It sounds right. But in any event, he writes the opinion and he says, we're not going to have this strict scrutiny anymore for free exercise issues, especially when it's a criminal offense. Right? We have a criminal law. We're not directing it against the Native Americans. He says we're directing it against anybody. It's a criminal law. We don't want peyote in the society. And you guys are not going to get a buy because it happens to be part of your religion. Too bad. You can't do it. You don't get your unemployment benefits. Well, Congress goes nuts. Whoa, man, next thing you know, we're not going to be able to worship Jesus. This is terrible. And they write and they come up with this law. Thank you, Congress. they come up with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which they say the Supreme Court in the Smith decision got it wrong. We like Sherbert v. Werner, and and they put this in the law. They said we're reinstating the strict scrutiny test of Sherbert v. Werner. Government cannot interfere with anybody's religious interest rights unless they have a compelling state interest and they narrowly tailor their laws. We're reinstating Sherbert v. Werner. Okay, so that's the state of the law under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Until 1997, another case comes up to the Supreme Court. It's called City of Boerne, and in Texas there was this church. They were meeting in a National Historic building, and they were getting big. They started getting a lot more parishioners. So they wanted to expand. Well, the people in charge of the National Historic thing said, no, you can't do it. It's a National Historic. We're not letting you expand. So, well, you're interfering with our free exercise rights. We can't make this church big enough to have everybody in here. So the case goes to the Supreme Court, and they said, look, we have RFRA. Congress passed a law that says you have to have a compelling state interest. You have it's not a compelling interest to have this one building adhere to the historic codes. So we should win this case under RFRA. And what the Supreme Court said was, Congress, what are you, nuts? It says, didn't you read our opinion in Smith? We said we're not using strict scrutiny. You can't tell us that you're going to use strict scrutiny. We just said that's not how it works, all right? We decide what the Constitution means, and this Constitution does not mean that you use strict scrutiny in these situations. So the Supreme Court overturned RFRA, but only as it applies to the states, through the 14th Amendment. The question remained, does it apply, is it still good law against the United States government itself? Can Congress say, we are going to apply strict scrutiny to ourselves? And that was an issue. There was a split in the circuits up until this very year. Earlier this year, I think it was in April, they came up with this case, you may have heard of it, about Huascati, some sect it's a religious group that comes out of Brazil, and they use these tea leaves that have a hallucinogen in them. And so they were using this stuff, making this hallucinogenic tea. And they imported this stuff, and the FDA heard about it and said, we can throw you in jail if you do this anymore. They said, you're interfering with our free exercise rights. And so they brought the case to the Supreme Court again. Now we're using RFRA. They said, we have a RFRA claim. The Congress of the United States has said that we're allowed to bring this stuff in because you don't have a compelling interest. What do you care if we bring this in? We're not hurting anybody. None of us are dying. We have this hallucinogenic tea. It's our right to do that. And so the issue was, well, now does this apply to the federal government, or has RFRA been overturned by the case, the City of Boerne case? And the Supreme Court, 8-0, Alito wasn't there yet, 8-0, they come in and they say, they rule in the favor of the church. They said, there's no compelling interest here. RFRA is good law. Thank you, Congress, because that is our case, and that is how we're going to get God we trust off the coins and currency.